Is from Coalition for Marriage. And for the record, could you please introduce yourselves?
We're from the Coalition for Marriage, and we're very grateful to the committee for this opportunity to present some of our concerns. We're obviously aware of the fact the second reading debate has been concluded, so that's done. But we wish to focus on what we fear could be some of the unintended consequences of the legislation as it stands, and we'd like to offer some constructive proposals. So I'm Sharon James from the Coalition for Marriage. I'm a volunteer spokesperson.
And I'm Colin Hart, the Campaign Director of the Coalition for Marriage.
Stephen Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have heard me, if you were in the earlier session, ask the Out for Marriage campaign about the tone of their campaign, whether they wished it to be positive or negative. How would you describe the tone of your own campaign?
Well, we just have one aim, really. We've got an online petition, and people up and down the country have signed that petition saying that they would like the current legal definition of marriage to be retained. And so we've really tried to steer away from other stuff, as it were. We have one aim, so that means that we are representing people of faith, people of no faith. We have gay people supporting our campaign. We're not a religious group, and we've really tried to keep religion out of it and to keep, if you like, other issues out of it which people want us to talk about, but we don't want to talk about those issues because it's just about the legal definition of marriage, and we do represent all kinds of people.
Well, I wondered if, particularly if you had any regrets about some of your campaign tactics. For instance, the distribution of leaflets in some MPs' constituencies with photographs of them on those leaflets. My colleague Annette Brooke would be one example. Sarah Newton, a coalition colleague in Truro, would be another, who I understand were both extremely upset by the tactics that you used, which implied that they were against same-sex marriage. They both voted for the bill. I believe Mrs. Brooke has asked you for an apology, and none has been forthcoming. Would you like to take this opportunity to apologise on the record? It'll be in Hansard.
Well, of course, people are entitled to ask people to write to their MPs, and I think that's legitimate. And if newspapers carry a picture of an MP, that doesn't mean the MP endorses the article that accompanies that picture. So if you actually look at the leaflet, we're very clear it's from the Coalition for Marriage, not from the MP. If they don't read it carefully enough, I can't be responsible for that. Of course, as you say, those MPs voted for the bill. That's up to them. All we were trying to do was to get people to contact their MP to say their views. It's a free country. People can do that.
So you don't regret that particular tactic?
No.
We're very pleased with the opportunity to let people know the arguments. We've heard from lots of people up and down the country said, we had no idea what was going on. They felt they hadn't been told what was going on, and they were glad, whether they agreed with the campaign or not, they were actually quite glad to think, hey, this is actually going on now, it's raising the issue.
I mean, to be fair, if you are in favour of the bill, if you get that leaflet through your door, you can write to your MP and say, I'm in favour of it, can't you? We're very clear. All we're doing was giving the name of the MP and how they can contact their MP. I mean, MPs' pictures are used every week in the local newspaper. It doesn't mean to say the MP endorses the actual article in the newspaper. That wasn't our intention at all.
Kate Green.
Why is it important to protect a legal definition of marriage in its current form? I can understand some of the arguments made by some faith groups, although not all people of faith are opposed to this legislation, but I can't understand what the objection is from a legal point of view. Perhaps you could explain it to me.
It's not just the legal definition, obviously.
I think you said a moment ago that it was.
Mainly the legal definition, but it's what lies behind it. We simply represent people up and down the country who genuinely, in their conscience, whether they're religious or not, believe that marriage as marriage, whether it has a civil ceremony or a religious ceremony to begin with, is irrelevant, but marriage as marriage is the union of a man and a woman.
Yeah. Just coming to the issue of the law. I mean, civil partnerships is legally equal. There's every right in marriage is given to those who are in same-sex couples in civil partnerships. But it doesn't actually change the law of marriage. So, for example, we heard, I was listening to the Roman Catholic presentation this morning. There was a law that says that people should be taught about the importance of marriage. And if you have civil partnerships, that doesn't change that law. But if you change the definition of marriage, then every time the word marriage is used, that imports a new meaning, potentially presenting issues of conscience for those that never had it before. They could say, well, civil partnerships, well, that's something different. It has the same legal rights, but it's a different thing. But if they are the same thing and the definition of marriage changes, then that does present some issues of conscience.
But the definition has, of course, changed in a number of ways over the years. What's different this time?
Well, it's always been between marriage is, there are two sexes. Marriage is the union of the
yes,
sexes.
this is another thing that's changing. But why is this characteristically different from changes, for example, to recognise rape within marriage?
Well,
there have always been changes in the way that marriage has been regulated and modified, and nobody is arguing with that. And there has been that level of natural evolution, clearly. But none of that has ever changed the fundamental understanding that societies across cultures, across times have had, that it's bigger than the two people concerned, it's a building block linking the generations. The fact that some married couples don't or can't have children has not affected that fundamental social understanding of marriage as a building block, creating wider family networks. To do with genealogy, those bigger issues outside the couple.
I mean, there have been legal protections put in place. For example, the issue of consent. Well, 1,000 years ago, the kidnapping of brides was a major issue. And we had the Council of Lateran with bans and a whole range of things introduced to establish real consent. But that didn't change the nature of marriage. It was just a safeguard, and the same similarly with the law of rape that you talked about.
Chris Bright?
Did you support civil partnerships?
I supported the extension, I supported a PACS-like scheme that they have in France where house sharers would have some rights. When I grew up, the lady next door, she gave up her job in the city. She had a well-paid job, gave up her job to care for her elderly father. I hardly saw him. But she was saddled with inheritance tax when her elderly father, who she'd given up her job to nurse, died. I had two great aunts in Brighton. One of them died. The other didn't inherit the tenancy, so she had to leave. So I did support the extension of civil partnerships to house sharers in family relationships, two sisters live together, that sort of thing. But I also was concerned that civil partnerships might lead to what we've got today. And a number of people had those concerns. A number of things were said in the debates trying to allay concerns, but as we've seen, this is what has happened.
So you were in favour of the Wrecking Amendment to the civil partnerships when civil partnerships were being advanced solely for same-sex couples to be able to express their love one for another, the Wrecking Amendment, which would have turned it into a tax avoidance measure.
Well, I don't think it's tax avoidance for that lady who gave up her job to look after her elderly father. I was genuinely in favour of that.
Well, many of us at the time, and I remember many of those who voted for that Wrecking Amendment then either voted against second reading or against third reading, and it was very much clearly seen as an attempt to try and prevent this being, civil partnerships being something that was for an exclusive relationship, one person with another person.
But why shouldn't the government provide for that sort of house-sharing situation?
Well, let me put you a different question. Why should the state prevent two people from getting married who are just because they are of the same gender?
All the legal rights of marriage are already available through civil partnerships.
Sorry, Mr. Hart, your organisation, Commission Institute, campaigned against civil partnerships. That is a matter of record which we're all capable of checking. Thank you very much. You also campaigned against the repeal of Section 28 and against every single extension of equality rights to lesbian and gay people in this country. Why on earth should we believe that your opposition to equal marriage has got anything to do with marriage, given that record? It's about homophobia, pure and simple.
If you check the record, you will see that I was in favour of a PACS-like scheme at the time that civil partnerships was debated.
Your campaign, your organisation campaigned, spent a great deal of money campaigning against civil partnerships. How can you possibly try to wheedle out of that now with this irrelevance that you're talking about?
I'm here on behalf of the Coalition for Marriage, and the fact is a lot of supporters of marriage would agree with civil partnerships, and some would not. But that's up to them. But the people who support the Coalition for Marriage all agree that the definition of marriage should stay the same as it is.
Can I just go? Sorry, Sharon.
Well, look, I don't want to get an argument going here. It's questions for witnesses, and there are other members want to ask questions. Tim Lawton.
Can I ask you, what do you think is the point of marriage? And perhaps to explain a bit more the impact you think that extending marriage to same-sex couples will have on heterosexually married couples, and why it's not necessarily just a one-way deal that's on offer here?
Well, I would argue that historically, when you look at the reasons societies have been involved in marriages, from the very earliest days, it's been to do with linking natural parents with their own children. So, I mean, aside from any scriptural stuff, way back about 1900, you've got a king of Mesopotamia, huge, great, long legal code, a third of it about marriage, and the fundamental point of it, he says, was I made the fathers stand by their children, I made the children stand by their fathers. It was just across cultures, that recognition that there's something to do with that male-female bond and legitimising the children. And frankly, if parents don't look after a child, somebody else has to pick up the tab. And we could perhaps speak at length about who picks up the tab when that doesn't happen, but that's not the point of this afternoon. So marriage, in a sense, has already been redefined, and I would regret that, because I believe it has been redefined down into being just about the individual satisfaction of the two people involved, whereas I think sociologically, historically, anthropologically, it's bigger than that, and it's more than the couple involved. It's to do with genealogy behind them, genealogy coming after them, and their place within that. And I think that that's really what unites different supporters of Coalition for Marriage. Now, some of them are people of strong faith, but many of them are not, and frankly have little interest in faith. But they do have an interest in, if you like, communal stability and well-being. And I think for many of our supporters, the consequence of redefining marriage would have impacts on children and on society, but they are also deeply concerned that it will have impact on freedom of conscience. And in a sense, that's what we would like to focus on this afternoon, because we're hearing from people who say, I don't dare say what I believe about marriage anymore. A senior NHS executive came up to me 2 weeks ago and said, I would love to sign your petition, I would love to support the campaign, I will lose my job if I do so. And we're hearing from people like that regularly. And we're hearing from people who are anxious about even going into teaching, because they fear that whatever the government is saying about protection, as equality law develops, those protections will be knocked down. And we've had expert advice from John Bowers QC saying that the protection as it stands is inadequate, and there's not enough protection in the face of the bill for teachers. Now, at a stage where we're chronically short of gifted teachers, particularly in inner city schools, if young people are saying to us, we're frankly afraid to go into teaching because we believe in man-woman marriage and will likely find our jobs under threat, we can ill afford that kind of loss to society. And we're having experienced teachers saying to us, frankly, we'll probably just retire early and get out of this before our position is threatened. So these are the kinds of cases. Nobody wants to go back to the old intolerance which we've heard about passionately this afternoon. And we would abhor. Nobody wants to go back to that old kind of intolerance. But we're representing people who are genuinely afraid of a new kind of intolerance, a chilling intolerance, whereby they will not be allowed to stand for what they believe. And it's all very well to smile, but we don't want to go back to the old days. And I think there are many people of good faith on both sides of the argument who don't want to enter a new day of people fearing this kind of intolerance.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, if I may, Chair. Firstly, to specifically follow that point there, could you explain to us why you believe a change in marriage would produce a different situation for, say, a teacher to how they would have to deal with an issue like abortion at present in the classroom? They may have a strong moral objection.
Both of us being teachers in comprehensive schools. And as a teacher, you would deal with controversial issues very carefully. And of course, if a young person asks a teacher, what does the law of marriage say? You would say what it would be if the law did change. So we're not talking about that. What we are talking about is the fact that sexual orientation is an equality head, it's a characteristic that's protected by law. Marriage, if it's redefined, would be used, we fear, and John Bowers confirms that the public sector equality duty is very strong, and some local authorities could use that and say, well, not only do you have a duty just to merely explain objectively what the law actually says, you must promote. And our advice that we've received is that that could happen.
Could I just also say that I was in a public meeting 2 weeks ago and somebody got up and passionately said, if any teacher cannot wholeheartedly endorse gay marriage, they have no place in our classrooms at all. They should be sacked. And that statement was greeted with cheers. So
people say all sorts of things about all sorts of things. It doesn't make them legally correct. I have constituents who tell me that they cannot remove the snow from outside their house because if somebody falls over, they will be legally liable. It's nonsense. People say all sorts of things.
Simply that, with that level of passion and feeling, and it was sincere passion and feeling, and in a sense, you know, you take on board that person's sincere belief. But with people who have that sincere belief, those are precisely the kind of people these young teachers are fearing will launch, if you like, a malicious accusation against them that could lead an overzealous local authority to accuse them of homophobia or whatever it might be. Nobody's saying that it's reasonable, but unreasonable things happen. And what we would like in the face of the bill, on the top of the bill, right there, at the moment the bill is all about religious ministers and their protection. Most people in this country aren't that fussed about religious ministers and their protection, but they are worried about public sector workers and teachers and foster parents and so forth. So we would like protections written up into the face of the bill to say that those kind of ridiculous and unnecessary and, you know, false situations couldn't arise, and people will be protected. And I think that particularly younger people, and we have many young supporters, they deserve that kind of protection for their future careers.
We have hundreds and we have thousands of faith schools in our country who do a fantastic job, and in most of those schools, most of the time, the teachers will be teaching students, sex education, but they will still be giving their view about whether they are pro or anti-abortion, whether they are pro or anti-divorce, and at no point does that become an issue where somehow you're not allowed to be anti-abortion, you're not allowed to be anti-divorce. People express their views. If they express them in a reasonable manner, there is no issue. And most of us around this table, I am sure, have probably been to those schools.
But,
Excuse me, Alda, I'm keen not to have a debate. This is an evidence session for questions and answers. And I'm going to Mr. Reynolds now for his second question.
A slightly different issue. Many of the people who were objectors, who contacted their MPs, perhaps in response to your campaign, specifically highlighted a concern that through litigation, churches will be forced to open up their ceremonies to same-sex marriage. The legal opinion, the expert legal opinion that we've received, I think, this morning, completely discounted that, I think, in the eyes of many of us. Are you now satisfied that the so-called quadruple lock is adequate in the bill?
No. I think there is instability in the law, particularly in relation to the Church of England, which Aidan O'Neill has referred to. I think the issue, though, is not the domestic law. The issue is what Europe will do. The QCs that we have consulted have a pretty good track record in beating the government. One of them won a case involving prisoners' votes. Another established the right for gays to be in the military. The government doesn't always get it right, and some QCs don't always get it right when they're arguing. And the fact is, this will be litigated on one way and another. Already the lawyers are arguing, and that will happen if this bill is passed.
But actually, could I just say again that the Coalition for Marriage concern is much deeper and wider than ministers of religion and places of worship. Because we're hearing from, if you like, little charities up and down the country providing perhaps marriage counselling services, premarital counselling, marital counselling, family support work. And a lot of these are run by people who do it out of love, voluntarily, out of their free time. But many of them are people of faith who say that they could not affirm the new definition of marriage. And they're frankly saying to us, we will just stop doing this kind of thing rather than run the risk of being challenged. And so our concern, if you like, is that when you look at community cohesion, it runs on a lot of voluntary stuff that people do, not for pay, but for love. And we're having people of good faith who believe marriage is between a man and a woman, saying we will be challenged probably if we can't go with a new definition, and we'd rather just, if you like, stop doing it. It's an unintended consequence. Nobody here would want that to happen. You're all people of goodwill. But it's a bit like child protection. We've both been in teaching. And all of the zealous child protection stuff, people end up having to have 6 or 7 different police checks 7 different voluntary activities. What's the effect? I know, you know, people have just given up doing voluntary stuff in some cases because they think, I just can't face another police check. Unintended consequence, legislation can actually lead to people stopping doing things that the society benefits from them doing.
Jean Allison?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just coming back to the facts, are you aware of any successful challenges in the European Court in countries that have had same-sex marriage for some years?
Well, I think one thing I would say is you've got to compare like with like. We do not have a particularly good record in this country of dealing with conflicts of rights. We have a winner-take-all approach. That isn't true in other countries. We do not have laws that offer reasonable accommodation.
That wasn't my question, to be fair.
No, it is important that these conflicts are avoided in other countries precisely because they do have laws that we don't have. They do have laws on reasonable accommodation. So, for example, if you have your registrar in Holland who doesn't want to do same-sex ceremony, doesn't have to. The Supreme Court of Holland has just said that. Civil Rights Act in 1974 in America, federal law has reasonable accommodation. We don't have that law. That avoids conflict. It means ways of solving problems in the workplace. We don't have that.
But in Canada there have been cases of litigation brought against, for example, a homeless charity operating on a faith basis that couldn't affirm the new definition of marriage. I haven't had the up-to-date result of that, but I think it went out of business or is going. So I think in Canada there have been cases of litigation against people who have not been able to accept the new definition of marriage.
The other question just occurred to me while you were giving some of your earlier evidence. I mean, do you think that, you know, behind your campaign, do you think within your campaign there are people who are entirely unreconciled to the idea that homosexual people should be equal in today's society?
How would we know? Because the only thing they come to us to do is mainly sign the petition that they want to keep marriage as it is. We're not responsible for their individual views on anything. I mean, that they cross political parties, it's nothing to do with us. They can be whatever political party they want.
I mean, some people who've written to me have certainly sort of expressed that view. And the other thing, if I could just put to you, constantly this argument is put that there's no free speech. I mean, as a Member of Parliament, and I think all of us, the last few weeks have been testimony to the fact that people feel they can say whatever they want, and quite rightly in this country. And there's been no whinging from MPs or anything else. People have expressed a view, the papers have been full of it. This notion that you know, all debate is being closed down on these issues, I don't know how you think that.
That's a great thing, isn't it? It's a great thing to have that freedom, and you have a free vote, but people who work in the public sector won't get a free vote. I think of one case we had, people have been collecting petitions with their friends. One lady collected amongst the mums outside school. The head came out and said, you can't collect Coalition for Marriage, it breaks our equality policy. Arthur McGeorge, a bus driver in County Durham, asked some of his friends at work to sign. Somebody objected, he was disciplined. He was worried that he might lose his job. That is a reality of what could go on in some places. It's not going on here, but it could go on.
And frankly, of course it's good that there has been debate and people have contacted their MPs, and of course it's outrageous if people have contacted you in intemperate or bad language. That's never acceptable, but that's not the responsibility of any campaign group. People on both sides might have intemperate people on supporting them for some reason. But as we've said, the public have not had a chance to vote on this. And our supporters are surprised that 3 days before the election campaign, Mr Cameron said on Sky TV that he had no plans to redefine marriage. And they're saying, we didn't vote on this. Couldn't we at least wait and vote on this at the next election or have a referendum? And that's people on both sides of the argument actually saying that to us, saying we aren't getting a chance to vote on this. So I think that there is an issue of free speech, and I go back to the fact that things have happened already before this legislation comes in that concern us. I was speaking at a conference last summer along with speakers such as Philip Blond et al, and they had a whole range of different philosophical and other views, but they did believe in, or we did believe in, man-woman marriage. And as you probably know, we were banned first of all from the Law Society, second of all from the Queen Elizabeth Centre, and both of them cited diversity policy as the cause of that banning. And then of course you're familiar with the case of Adrian Smith that we are concerned about, because although Adrian Smith, who was demoted from his job, got a 40% pay cut simply for saying on his private Facebook page that he believed in man-woman marriage, or marriage, gay marriage in church, a step too far. And while a lawyer has said he did nothing wrong, yet he has not received his earnings back, yet he has not received that job back. And again, our supporters are saying that sort of thing could happen to us if we're in the public sector. And that's why I come back to the constructive suggestion. We're not just here to, if you like, say concerns. We would like written into the face of the bill some positive protection, safety, assurances for those people who are genuinely worried when they look at cases like Adrian Smith, that they would like their jobs, their positions protected. And I don't think that's too much to ask for, because none of us want,
Good.
I sincerely say, none of us want discrimination, and we don't want a new kind of discrimination, wrongful discrimination.
Before I call the next member, I have a few members who want to ask questions. Can I just say the questions be as brief as possible and the answers straight to the point? Stephen Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Pitt. Can I just say, Dr. James, that's not what your representatives in Snorstall High Street were asking people to sign a petition for on Saturday. They were still not accepting that second reading has happened, with almost two-thirds members of Parliament supporting it. They weren't raising issues for additional protections for workers. They were coming to the issue about redefinition of marriage. And I think we should lift the veil on this. Whilst you're not responsible for the views of everybody who signs your petitions, can both of you give me a yes-no answer? Do you think lesbian and gay people should be able to get married in this country?
No, I don't think they should get married. That's the whole point of our campaign. Lesbian and gay people have civil rights through civil partnerships. We absolutely believe in equality of
Dr. James, no is fine.
treatment.
Mr. Hart.
Well, obviously, I want the current definition of marriage to stay. The bill is not over yet. The bill is not yet an act. But there are issues. There's been a vote in the Commons. It's got many months ahead. There are arguments about the protections.
No is fine. If I may, Mr. Hood, but you've both indicated, and I think we all accept, that there are significant benefits from marriage in terms of stability, in terms of health, in terms of happiness for the couples that are in that institution. Why do you two want to exclude a proportion of our society from having access to those benefits that you are willing to take as a privilege for yourselves?
This is
The studies have been on opposite-sex marriage, so I don't know about the studies on same-sex unions, but the studies about the effects on children involve a mum and a dad. So you'd have to compare like with like. I don't know. But if there's a union wanted, that's already available through civil partnerships.
This is really a matter of, for our supporters, it is a matter of principle. And many of our supporters are absolutely clear that gay and lesbian couples have rights through civil partnerships, but our supporters do not believe that marriage can or should or will be between a same-sex couple, simply because they believe that the definition of marriage is the complementary union of a man and a woman. And just as two genders are different, men are different to women, they say it's not discrimination to treat two different things differently. And I know that that is a difference of opinion we have. We are going to go away from this room. We are going to go away from this room with differences of opinion. But I would simply say that can we not at least accept the fact that this very large number of people in this country who genuinely have the view that we have of marriage, can we not accept the fact that these people should not be, if you like, attacked in a new way, and their view should be respected as well?
I think this will have to be the last question. We have 2 minutes left. Jim Shannon.
Can just say very quickly, thank you very much for the petition you ran and for the number of people that you got to reply to that. I'm very, very pleased with that. In relation to many people in this committee today, many people outside have said that this is a bit of a permissive measure and therefore don't worry about it. But the fact is that many of us feel it's a coercive measure. Could you perhaps give us some indication of some of the examples of coercive measures that are already taking place without this legislation coming in, which will affect those in positions in public life, and teachers and churches as well? And what do you see as positive protection that may ensure that churches and people in those positions are not disadvantaged?
I think the issue is that there's been no attempt to look at individuals, and that's what our call has been today. There's been a lot of focus on weddings and on church buildings. We'd say, look at church buildings, look at individuals, there are a variety of ways of doing that. Edward Lee proposed one way, creating a characteristic of beliefs about marriage, whether you're for gay marriage, whether you're against, those views could be protected, so it would be even-handed. Another way would just be to make it clear beyond doubt that a belief about marriage is a belief that falls to be protected. Now, that doesn't mean to say you win, because in this country we do not even get to a balancing of rights when it comes to marriage, because marriage loses, as the case of Lynn Liddell is clear. So there are already cases like Adrian Smith going on now before this law has changed. He didn't get his job back. The case would have cost him £30,000. He won £98 in compensation. He was advised by 2 Queen's counsels that he wouldn't have won in the employment tribunal.
Order, I'm afraid that we have to bring things to an end. The allocated time of the committee is now over. Can I thank you very much for coming and giving your evidence today. And can the next panel please come forward?